I'm Dave Cook from the Monitor. Our guest today is Fred Hochberg, Chairman and President of the Export-Import Bank of the United States. This is his first visit with our group, and we appreciate his coming. Our guest had a lifelong tie to American business. While his mother was pregnant with him, around the family kitchen table, she started the company that would become the catalog and online store Lilly & Vernon. Mr. Hochberg earned his undergraduate degree from New York University and his MBA at Columbia. He also attended the Executive Leadership Program at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. From 1975 through 1993, our guest was president and CEO of Lilly & Vernon. During that time, he also served on the Democratic National Committee and as co-chair of the Human Rights Campaign. After running his own firm for several years, our guest served as deputy and then as acting administrator of the Small Business Administration under President Clinton. Then he served as dean of the Graduate School of Management and Urban Policy at New School University. He's held his current position at the Ex-Im Bank since May 2009. Thus endeth the biographical portion of the program. Now on to the riveting mechanical details. First, thanks to our underwriter, the Aerospace Industries Association. As always, we're on the record here. Please, no live blogging or tweeting, and short, no filing of any kind while the breakfast is underway to give us time to actually listen to what our guest says. There's no embargo when the session ends. To help you curb that relentless selfie urge, we will email several pictures of the session to all the reporters here as soon as the breakfast ends. As regular attendees know, if you'd like to ask a question, please do the traditional thing and send me a subtle, non-threatening signal, and I'll happily call on one and all. We'll start off by offering our guests the opportunity to make some opening comments, and then we'll move to questions from around the table. And with that, sir, thanks for doing this. The floor is yours.
David, I like this already. Thank you, David, for inviting me, and the staff table I met particularly on our detour. I was speaking with a gathering of some exporters from around the country recently, and actually just up the street at the chamber. And a supply chain manager from Oregon asked me, he said, well, if Ex-Im doesn't get a long-term reauthorization, what's your plan B? And I paused and thought for a minute, and then I said, well, there is no plan B. We're plan B. For exporters, plan A is the private sector, so we are the plan B. And I think we all know that the commercial sector doesn't always have the capacity to equip every business who wants to sell overseas. Our private sector can finance most exports. They just can't do it all. And that's where we come in. Ex-Im is the official export credit agency of the United States. And just like people get fire insurance and theft insurance, companies frequently need what's called export credit insurance to protect their overseas sales. They often need working capital to stay competitive and keep innovating. And sometimes their overseas buyers need loans or loan guarantees in order to buy from the United States. In a lot of cases, when a company is small or if it wants to sell in the developing world, the private sector simply isn't available to offer financing. So our role is to provide certainty in filling those gaps. Often those gaps fall where commercial banks are usually unable or unwilling to lend. For example, projects in the developing world, 2/3 of our loans and loan guarantees are in the developing world. Very small transactions, 90% of the transactions we do, our customers are for small businesses. And then there's also very large, complex infrastructure projects, power projects, which support tens of thousands of jobs in the supply chain. And that's why Ex-Im exists, and that's why I refer to us as being Plan B. And if Plan B goes away, of course, there's always Plan C. Plan C is China. So it's very simple. It's really ABC. China is hungry to win the projects we'd be forfeiting by unilaterally disarming. I just returned from a meeting with many of my counterparts from around the globe, and I asked them whether they anticipate doing more or less support for their exporters in the next 5 years. Japan, Korea, Russia, Germany, France, Brazil, every one of them indicated they will be accelerating their financial support for exporters. And that's to say nothing of China. In fact, one of the 4 export finance agencies noted that they, in China, will doubled their activity in 2014, and they expect to double it again in the next year or two. Meeting that foreign competition is one of our roles. The other is filling gaps in the market. When private financiers withdraw from regions or sectors due to the financial crises, export credit agencies, or we're called ECAs, step in so that exporters don't lose sales and don't have to lay off workers. ECAs, export credit agencies, are somewhat like fire trucks. And we don't sell off the fire truck just because there's a fire raging right now. Today, Ex-Im is releasing our annual competitiveness report. Everyone here should have a copy. We've been putting this report out for 45 years, but I think it's never been more relevant than it is today, and let me tell you why I feel that way. Last year, we found there were 59 other versions of Ex-Im around the globe, all fighting for global leadership. This data is hard to come by. There's not a lot of transparency. This year we dug deeper, and we identified 85 export credit agencies around the world. And many of them don't operate under the same rules or the same transparency or lending standards that we do. In fact, fewer than 40 follow guidelines set out by the OECD, and we're one of them. Now, the OECD is the international agreement that for decades has set responsible standards to prevent a global race to the bottom. Back in 1999, 100% of official export credit agencies fell under these rules. Last year, it was 40%, and as you'll see in Chapter 2, the share of export financing that follows rules dropped further, another 4%. It's now 2 to 1. There are $2 for every non-rules-based, non-transparent financing to every $1 that follows the rules that's transparent. And we don't have to speculate about where that escalation of non-rules-based financing is coming from. Chapter 3 shows that while most of the world has held steady the last year, China's lending grew by 40%. And more ECAs, more Asian ECAs are following that model, and you'll find more about that in Chapter 5. It's very clear to me, and I've been in business for a long time, American businesses aren't looking for a handout. They simply want a level playing field. So let me leave you with one or two thoughts before we go to questions. I was in business for 20 years, and I've been in this job for 6. And I have never seen competition this intense. The trends we're seeing right now are only adding jet fuel to the challenges exporters face. So let me put it very simply. In 81 years, the Export-Import Bank did just under $600 billion in loans, guarantees, and insurance in 81 years. China has done a minimum that we can identify of $670 billion in the last 2 years. It took us over 80 years to get to a number about that, and they've done that in less than 2 years. So I know you're all finishing your breakfast. I hope to start mine.
Yeah.
But let's not forget, China would like to eat our lunch. So we don't emulate what other ECAs do. We simply strive to level the playing field with reliable, rules-based financing. And that gives buyers, overseas buyers, the freedom to choose based on free market factors like quality and value. When U.S. exporters go to the global markets armed with financing from Ex-Im, they have an opportunity to compete on their own merits, on their product's merit. And that means more jobs end up here in America that might otherwise have landed 1,000 miles away. Last year, we supported 164,000 jobs. If we weren't around, those 164,000 jobs would have been created somewhere, but not here. So thank you. Thank you for giving me this time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
So I'll try and make my first question really long so that you can have a bite or two. Then we're going to go, after I do my one or two, to George Kalink of CQ, Tim Carney of The Examiner, Kathleen Miller of Bloomberg, David Lauder of Reuters, and John Gizzi of Newsmax. As you know, there's a battle raging in the House today over both TAA and TPA, and I wonder if you could tell us how, if at all, that battle will affect, in your view, reauthorization of the bank.
Well, let's say this. First and foremost, Trade Promotion Authority and ultimately TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, and TTIP for Transatlantic are vital to making sure that we have a level playing field. We've got American companies and American workers on a level playing field so we can get access to those markets. So we need access to those markets. We need access to open those doors. And what EXIM has to do with is close the deals. So we need more trade agreements to open the doors, and we need EXIM so we can close the deals. You know, they're all part of a larger, holistic view about we have to engage more with the outside world. President Obama's been really clear. Trade is going to be what's going to drive our economy, drive better wages, drive better jobs, and so these things are really linked.
If that were to fail, if the president were not able to get TPA, in your view, does that sour the climate for you to get reauthorized? A lot of talk about your reauthorization probably coming with a highway bill later in the summer. What does it do to you, if at all?
Well, you know, we've been around 81 years, and we've been supporting jobs for 81 years, and we do it at a quote-unquote profit to the federal government. We send money to the Treasury every year. We sent $675 million last year. So I'm still confident that we're going to get reauthorized. We had a bipartisan majority just in 2012 in both the House and an overwhelming majority. We had 330 votes in the House. We had 78 in the Senate. So I'm still confident, you know, that the fact that we create jobs, we send money to the Treasury, and 90% of our customers are small business are compelling arguments.
Last from me on that is you say you're confident, and I've seen you quoted on that in a number of places, and you told Politico, frankly, we're going to be reauthorized. The question will be precisely when and what form. Are you as confident? I know you're confident you're going to get reauthorized. Are you confident that you'll get reauthorized without a lapse, or do you think that there's a likelihood of a lapse?
Well, I know what my job is. My job is to run the bank. My job is to support U.S. exporters and their workers. I'm going to leave the legislative strategy and tactics to people on the Hill. I spoke to Senator Heitkamp yesterday, who's been a spectacular champion of EXIM from North Dakota. She's been very strong. She and I have spent time together just a little over a year ago in North Dakota, in Fargo. We got a very strong vote in the Senate. She said, you know, I'm determined we ought to be able to get this done. I'm going to leave that to her. Yes, I know there's not a lot of time left. I'm not trying to be unrealistic, but we've got a lot of strong support. Mitch McConnell said there's going to be a vote. Speaker Boehner said there has to be a vote. So, and the President Obama is very supportive. So I think that we got a lot. There's some headwinds, but we got a lot of tailwinds.
George from CQ, let's start.
Thanks. As you know, Mr. Chairman, a lot of folks on the Hill say if it's going to be reauthorized, it needs to be reformed. Senate Banking Chairman Richard Shelby has said that repeatedly. I'm curious, one, if you've had any negotiations about potential bank reforms, and if so, what types of reforms might you be willing to support in exchange for a long-term reauthorization?
Well, you know, Stephen Fincher put out a bill in the House with a number of reforms. There's a reform. Actually, every bill I've seen has some kind of reforms or changes in the bank. Yeah, I would call them requirements more than sometimes reforms. I know when I was growing up, reforms was like reform school. It was like a bad thing, but maybe that's my age. Senator Kirk and Heitkamp, who have a bill in the House, and largely the one the Senate, that they voted on Wednesday, has a number of reforms in it. And let's remember, we put in 18 reforms in 2012. Chairman Spencer Baucus, you know, that was a tough bill. There were a lot of reforms. We've complied with each and every one of them. So I'm confident that working with it, we're available for technical assistance. When Senator Kirk wants some advice on how something would work, we've been there. Any member who would like to propose reforms, I'm happy to sit down with, work through what those reforms are to make sure that I understand what their objective is, and also that we can execute it.
Let me just follow up on that. Do you feel like Congress has reached out to you enough on some of these reforms? I know you said recently on the Hill that you hadn't met privately with Chairman Hensarling in several months. Do you feel like Congress is willing to work with you enough on this?
Actually, I had a meeting with Chairman Hensarling on Wednesday. I had a long conversation with Majority Leader McCarthy yesterday. So I think we're having, you know, more dialogue in terms of, okay, where are the differences? And can we begin to narrow some of those differences? And I am totally open. We had a Senate hearing, I guess 2 weeks ago. There were a lot of hearings. We've had 5. And I made it clear then, I'll sit down with our team. I've had our legislative team, our policy team, go up to the Hill, meet with members, meet with their staff to say, okay, my member's concerned about this. How can we solve that?
Tim Carney from the Washington Examiner.
You mentioned yes. If you want, I can give a speech so you can eat your food.
No.
You mentioned China, so I have a question about China. The economists from the London School of Economics said that China hurts its economy by about 2% with all its export sales. So is that something that we should, try to, in even a small part, emulate? Do you think China's helping itself with its export subsidies? And then the related question to that is, if they are the rival, why is the Chinese government the top recipient of financing from the Export-Import Bank, including at least 3 authorizations where we finance money to the Chinese Export-Import Bank? I don't know how that fits in with that.
Well, so first of all, I did not read the report you referred to. China is trying to balance its economy. It has a highly imbalanced economy, and that is not healthy for any economy. They have an economy that is so dependent on exports and investment, and so little dependent on consumer spending that that's what's damaging. That the money is not allocated well, because it's not allocated by the market. So, but exports as a percent of the GDP in China is more than double ours. So we have a long way to go. Our exports are just under 14% of GDP. They've never been higher. And we were the #1 exporter a little over a dozen years ago, and I think we can get back there, and I think the benefits would be great to that. But let's also remember one other thing. Our largest customer for exports is Canada, followed by Mexico, followed by China. It's the 3rd largest destination. There are, over 600 million people who are in the middle class. And if we want to have a strong export economy and a good place for U.S. goods and services, China is one of those key markets. There are a lot more people in China in the middle class, frankly, than there are in Mexico, frankly, than there are in Canada. And those are our 2 largest markets. So the last thing we want to do is close the door on selling to one of the largest and growing middle classes in the entire world.
But specifically, the financing, the majority of your China financing goes to Chinese state-owned enterprises. So isn't that propping up the very industrial?
What we have to understand is we're very fortunate in this country that we have, the height of state-owned enterprises is how much of the rest of the world operates, whether it's transportation, utilities, telecom, and so forth. In most of the rest of the world, state-owned enterprises are very dominant in that area. A lot of the world isn't where we are yet in terms of much more of a capitalistic system, much more free market. And so, that's who the customer is. And we got to understand we're competing, whether we're competing to sell Air China airplanes, it's either going to be a Boeing airplane or an Airbus airplane. And with the fact that it may be state-owned, that's the nature of that competition. But I don't see how that changes. Most of what we do in China has been either an aircraft and transactions that are actually guaranteed by the government, where we actually get a sovereign guarantee. And sometimes the vehicle they use is their export bank, but it essentially says it's a sovereign transaction.
We're going to go to Kathleen Miller from Bloomberg.
Hi there. First off, when you say there's 85 other ECAs around the world, does that include is it 85 other ECAs or 85 including the US?
Including us.
Okay, thanks. The other question was about Congressman.
And again, the number is, as I said, we keep digging to find it because sometimes they can be not as transparent. So that's why last year we said there were about 59, 60. Now become 85. That number is moves around a little bit.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned Republican Congressman Stephen Fincher, who opposed the bank's reauthorization in 2012 and now is probably its leading House Republican champion for reauthorizing it. Any insight as to what led him to change his mind? How much have you worked with him on getting the bank's charter extended?
Well, I learned at a hearing that he had changed his mind. It wasn't through a lot of sit down and cups of coffees and so forth. But I think that Stephen Fincher from Tennessee looked at the number of jobs we support in his district, looks at the fact that so much of our work is a small business, looks at the fact that we actually send money to the Treasury. But you should really ask him. He and I haven't had a heart-to-heart on what that is. I've just taken it at face value, and I'm happy that he supports us. There are others who did not support us and now support us, and we have a lot of new members of Congress from the 2012 vote.
So you haven't met with him personally at all?
Oh, I met with him. I'm trying to remember, months ago.
David Lauder from Reuters.
Hi, Mr. Hochberg. We hear a lot of rhetoric on both sides about what's going to happen if Ex-Im goes away. The people that want to kill it say that the private sector will fill the gap, will find a way. Proponents say that there's no way you can replace that government guarantee. So I wonder if you could just sort of walk us through, maybe what a typical deal would look like without Ex-Im financing. What kind of point spread difference are we talking about? Would there be credit available at all? The practicalities of it.
Right. Well, when someone seeks Ex-Im support, they actually have to state on the application that what's the reason. Is it foreign competition, or is it the lack of availability of credit from the private sector? So I mentioned this in my annual conference speech. A company called Darley that sells fire trucks in a lot of them to sub-Saharan Africa. Their big company, their competitor is a company called China Harzone, as an example. They always come with financing to the marketplace. So in that case, a company like Darley says, we can't go to market. If we're going to go to market, and particularly in a place where we're facing off against the Chinese will always bring financing as part of the deal. They don't sell goods without financing attached to it. So those companies are not armed with Ex-Im financing are frankly going to find themselves at a severe disadvantage. And many times they won't even get a seat at the table as a result of that. So part of it is just actually getting a seat at the table so they can actually negotiate and try and get the sale. Other companies, a lot of the small business we provide is credit insurance. Credit insurance, we're not less familiar in America than, say, they are in Europe, but credit insurance is, as I said, like fire and theft. We insure the overseas receivables. What will happen is they would have to ask customers for cash in advance, and the problem with that is customers around the world no one likes to pay cash in advance, and least of all, wholesale customers. You don't want to pay cash in advance. You put your goods on a boat, it takes 45 days to get there, and your customer's out of cash and doesn't see the product for 45 days, 60 days. So I think we're going to lose sales. And the 164,000 jobs that we supported last year, we're going to not be supporting that kind of job growth in the future.
So say on a Boeing aircraft deal, you're both trying to sell to some emerging market country, narrow-body jets or whatever. What kind of point spread is there between what Airbus would be able to bring to the table and what Boeing would be able to bring to the table without Ex-Im?
Well, I don't know if I can give you a precise number on that. I can a couple of things are important. One is we add a lot of capacity. When I say capacity, 12-year money. With Basel III, and I talk to commercial banks all the time, there is less and less banks willing to go much beyond 5 or 7 years. There's some, but it's very hard to come by. One of the things that we have been a leader on and trendsetter on is on capital markets, where we actually guarantee a capital markets transaction. So instead of guaranteeing a bank, we guarantee a capital markets. That's actually helped U.S. exporters. We would not be able to do that. I think the key thing is it's more about when you're trying to sell a good customer of the bank is Ethiopian Airways. They have a choice between Airbus and Boeing. And without financing, that puts Boeing at a severe disadvantage. And it's not just on the actual cost of financing for that exact plane, but in the aircraft area, for example, customers make commitments going out 5 and 10 years. I was with Copa Airlines in Panama. They made an order that goes between 9 and 12-year delivery. They need us as a backstop because they know at some point in their view, over the next 9 to 10 or 12 years, there will be some market dips. There will be some lack of availability. It might be localized to Latin America. It might be global. So we act as a backstop. If they can't get financing, we make sure the planes get delivered and that they can keep growing their airline and not be concerned about how they can plan their financing needs 10 years out. And so that's what we provide. We provide that kind of backstop, that they can have the certainty to place that order.
Can I ask you a quick factual question, and then we're going to go to John Gizzi of Newsmax. Bloomberg had a piece last week, I guess this week, that said that Boeing is by far the bank's largest beneficiary. Its customers received more than $7 billion of the $10.8 billion in long-term guarantees XM issued last year. Is that a number you can test, or is that an accurate statement?
Well, first of all, $7 billion sounds right, and I would say the denominator ought to be $20.5 billion is what we did in financings. You know, if you want to pick your denominator, you can make any number you want happen. The real denominator is we did $20.5 billion worth of loans, guarantees, and insurance, and aircraft loans, guarantees, and guarantees. Well, it's all guarantees actually, comprise about $7 billion of that.
Mr. Gizzi of Newsmax.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 questions. I'm sure you saw the item in the Post this morning about the intense lobbying on behalf of reauthorization done, led by the NAM Vice President, augmented with former Leader Gephardt and former Governor Barber. That's a lot of power, a lot of money to keep a government agency running again. And I would like to ask you, do you personally ever talk to the people in the private sector who are lobbying on behalf of reauthorization and strategize with them?
I don't strategize with them. I know Dick Gephardt for a long, long time, so I think he and I have I think we had coffee or breakfast once in the last 12 months. So, yeah, I got my job to do. They're been retained by a coalition of businesses, trade associations, Chamber, NAM, and others, and they're doing that work. But they're really working independently. As I said, I had one coffee or breakfast. I can't remember what it was. It was in a hotel.
Yeah, with Mr. Gephardt.
Yeah.
Right. The other thing is that I think a lot of people who don't normally follow the machinations of the XM Bank learned about it during the last campaign, because so often the mantra was put out the XM Bank was a poster child, a model, a centerfold for crony capitalism. What do you say in response when people say you're the epitome of crony capitalism?
Well, first of all, one good thing about the lineage and publicity we've gotten is more small businesses know who we are, know what we do, and how we actually aid their businesses in selling overseas and supporting jobs. So actually, we could not have a better promotion and advertising campaign to the small businesses that need us than this debate has caused. So that's actually been a benefit, clear and simple. Crony capitalism, crony capitalism, if you look it up on the dictionary or Wikipedia, it's like if I decide that, David, I'm going to give you this loan, and
God knows I need it.
You need it, and don't worry that much about paying it back, and I'm going to scratch your back, and later on I need you to do me a favor over here. That's crony capitalism. That's not what we do. People come to us. We're demand driven. We're demand driven. People come to us when they've got either foreign competition they're facing off against, and they need to make sure it's a level playing field, or it's a small business that says, I can't get my local bank, my local insurance company to support me, and I'm going to lose those overseas sales. So people come to us when they need that support, when they can't get it in the private sector. So that's why I really don't understand that term.
We're going to go to Frederica Schouten from USA Today.
Mr. Chairman, this is sort of related to that because the notion of killing off the Exim Bank seems to have been gaining traction in some important places. You have all these Republican presidential candidates, many of whom are sort of establishment business types who are talking about it. Some people have changed their positions. And it comes at the same time that, some pretty powerful forces in conservative politics, including Charles Koch, have said, we're going to put a big target on you. How much of this do you attribute to someone like Charles Koch?
I don't know, but if you listen to what they say, and I've even heard members in Congress, and let's remember, it's a small minority that oppose us. The majority last time and this time is still supportive. We have 250 members of the House support one of those two bills. A number of times they have said something to the effect as, well, we need to deal with the Exim Bank because how can we address other issues of government spending if we don't go to Exim Bank first? That's why they like to call us corporate welfare, because then I can go after other welfare. That's the reason. So I find it odd that when you listen, it's not about us. It's really, we become a gateway to do what they really want to do. And Koch Industries has actually been a beneficiary of Exim financing. I've seen they sometimes show up on large project deals.
Nick Timorous for the Wall Street Journal.
Thank you. I guess, Chairman, I'd ask, what would be the practical impact of a short-term lapse in your charter? 2 months, 3 months. What would happen if we saw that?
Well, when you say 2 or 3 months, that seems like a medium term. That doesn't sound short term to me. Well, a couple of things. One, we've already seen examples where companies have lost sales just by the uncertainty. We've seen where banks have stopped underwriting transactions because the uncertainty whether we're going to be there. They don't want to extend credit with a guarantee and then find out that they're out there and they can't support the customer without our guarantee, and if they have a customer that they don't want to disappoint. So we've already seen some trimming back in terms of bank engagement. So that's even just due to the uncertainty. If there were a lapse, we supported 164,000 jobs last year. We stopped supporting new jobs. If there were a lapse, last year we sent $675 million to the Treasury and for taxpayer for deficit reduction. We stopped generating new money to do deficit reduction. So those are things that happen immediately. And on top of it, I very much worry about the 450 people at Exim Bank. These are really hardworking civil servants. They do an excellent job, and although we're fully funded through the end of the fiscal year, just like every other federal agency, I worry about just that, these are people who have tuition checks to pay. I was just in one of our offices just last night, and I was looking at a picture on the vice president's desk and his son David. I remember when his son David was applying to college, and now he has graduated college. We have another guy, vice president, senior vice president, second marriage. He had a 1-year-old daughter when I met him, and she's now 7 and going into 2nd grade. So, I worry about the people at that bank because they're very hardworking. They're civil servants, and they got a job to do. And this uncertainty also plays a lot on them.
The reason I ask is because Boeing has said that they will self-finance. They've told they've begun telling customers they will self-finance if there's a lapse. And so I wonder what you say to critics of the bank who point to that and say, well, see, this actually shows that we may not need this bank.
Well, on an interim emergency, you should talk to Boeing and let them answer that question. But on an interim basis, there will be, if I was in business for 20 years, it would be pretty foolhardy if, with the debate going on and the uncertainty, not to have a plan B for companies that rely on us. And I tried to identify some of those issues. For small businesses, there are much fewer options. Getting cash in advance or having to tap into other lines of credit. Some companies, if they've got a small export footprint, they may be able to fit the financing into their regular general business. If they've got a larger one, it's going to be a bigger issue. Company I got to know well, Air Tractor, that sells crop dusters and firefighting planes for farmers. talked about laying off 65, 70 people. Now, will that happen on July 1? No, because he's got orders but he's going to ultimately, if we're not there, those jobs are in jeopardy. Another company I met with out in Bakersfield, California, he's 80-90% export. Don Nelson, he said, I'd have to probably lay off 50 or 60 people. So we're going to see, you will see layoffs, you will see lost business, and you will see, and we're already seeing foreign governments and foreign companies taking advantage of the uncertainty. Of the 85 export credit agencies, nobody else has to be recharted every few years. Nobody else has that uncertainty weighing over the heads of their exporters and their workers. I mean, we're the only one that go through that.
We're going to go to Amy Kaslow of Fortune magazine.
Thank you, Dave. Mr. Chairman, aside from the jobs that you described, the 164,000 jobs, and the market penetration, Exim has had experience with another very interesting element in American diplomatic commercial spheres, which is being there at the right time. For example, the fall of Central and Eastern Europe fall from communism, or move from communism to market economics, involved not only SEAP-1, SEAP-2 funding, OPIC funding. We were very much part of Exim as the U.S. extension was very much part of the package. A lot of interesting work done in Poland, which was apparently very, very important to us at the time. Probably the most important economy to shore up in the face of a lot of pressure. We are now seeing a little bit of redux over with Russia, certainly in Ukraine, and a lot of murmurings about inroads elsewhere. If you talk to the Central and Eastern Europeans, there's unease. To what extent, just looking back, using this as an example, but certainly not focusing on there, is Exim an important player in that broader sort of economic stability or democratization from the U.S. perspective in parts of the world?
Well, again, I'm very clear what our primary objective is: U.S. jobs and supporting U.S. companies when they compete overseas. But that said, I traveled, I guess it was 3 years, lost track, it's either 2 or 3 years ago, it was in the summer, to the Czech Republic, because they were looking at building a nuclear power plant with American equipment. So when I think of your question, there's a country that's looking and saying, we want energy security, and one way we're going to sell nuclear power is it needs to be financed. I actually traveled that time to the Czech Republic. They have since put that project on hold. Well, they've had some changes in government, but I traveled there with I met the CEO of Westinghouse, and I was there for essentially one purpose, was to assure the government that if Westinghouse was selected, that we were open to financing that transaction, because they said our competition was Rosatom, which is fully backed by the Russian government, or Areva, that was fully backed by the French government, and if we're going to consider a Westinghouse and get the energy security, which gives sort of economic security and some independence for a country like the Czech Republic, they needed to know that Exim was going to be there, because without, he said, we're not going to even they're out of the bidding. You're not going to be able to finance a nuclear power plant commercially on terms that anywhere remotely could equal the kind of terms that Russia and France, and I still don't know that we can meet those. We may not make them identical, but we can be close enough to make it an offset. So I think that's a very tangible example of that.
Can I follow up quickly? Sure. So just looking, there are plenty of hot spots around the world. For example, at some point, Syria needs massive rebuilding, and there are plenty of other places that we can raise. Where do you see Exim, assuming there is not a medium-term loss in momentum or any cancellation at all in the charter, where do you see Exim in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, partly that's why we do this competitiveness report, and that is, one, the competition is only increasing, and it's increased in my short time, my 6 years at the bank, it's much more intense. It's either the IMF or WTO put out a report. At one point, global trade was growing at about twice the level of GDP, and now it's at par. which just makes it far more competitive. So one, I just see heightened competition, and that's why TPA is important, that's why TTIP is important, that's why XM is important. So we have market access and we level the playing field in those marketplaces. Again, as I said, we're primarily about jobs, but last night we approved a preliminary commitment for power equipment to go to Egypt to enable an exporter to come to the negotiating table saying, I've already checked with the Exim Bank. Their board has approved a preliminary commitment, which simply is it's like a letter of interest, but it's been approved by our board to sell power equipment because they're competing against Siemens in Germany. So if we want to help build the power grid, create more stability in a place like Egypt, as an example, the two things happen. One, we want U.S. companies to get in there and get the jobs. But I think more fundamentally, when we build things together with people, if we're going to build a power system, build an infrastructure, and we have Americans on the ground doing so, it actually accrues to our long-term benefits because people that build things together form ties and bonds that go way beyond that commercial transaction. Shortly after I got to the bank, I had a delegation from Ghana come to see me. Ghana. And they remembered, I brought it up, they all remembered the power plant that we financed in 1962. And those benefits accrue to the United States way beyond the power plant being put up and even paid for. So I think that's very much the case.
Before we go to people who want a second round, is anybody not at a first round? Let's go to you and then to you.
Oh, Mr. Surley, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too. You said that earlier this week you met with Leader McCarthy and...
I spoke with him.
You spoke with Leader McCarthy and Chairman Henson. What did you guys talk about?
XM. We talked about some of their concerns regarding XM, and we talked about trying to answer questions that of concerns of theirs. I'm not going to get into a lot of the details. It was a meeting in their office, and one was on the telephone. But we talked about XM. I'm looking for a solution. I'm looking to forge and find common ground where we can, so we can move forward and keep supporting these jobs. So, how could I not meet with the chairman and the majority leader?
Quick follow-up. Did you get any indication that Leader McCarthy would be willing to change his mind? A lot of people don't believe him that he's opposing the bank's reauthorization. And did you talk to Speaker Boehner at all?
I have not spoken to the speaker, and I've got to know Kevin McCarthy over the years. I tried mostly to respond to concerns he's had so that I could give him answers and hear straight from me and say, if you've got other questions about the bank or other questions that, there's a lot of rumors, which is why at my hearing I brought it up. We have fulfilled and complied with every single reform of 2012. At one of the hearings, I brought in a copy of every report to show that I had copies of every single requirement and everything that we've complied with. So, I've spoken with Jeb Henschling. I spoke with the majority leader. I haven't spoken to Mitch McConnell either. So,
Mr. Russell.
Chairman, Edward Russell, Flight Global. Following the judge's dismissal of Delta's lawsuit, Delta Airlines lawsuit in March, do you face any more legal challenges from the carrier? And then do you expect any more challenges from other airlines?
Just to fill in, we were sued on 4 different occasions from Delta Airlines. The court has ruled in favor of XM on all of them. They did not appeal. So at this point, I don't expect any other court challenges in that regard.
Scott Horsley from NPR.
Well, aside from the legal part, how do you answer the complaint that in trying to level the playing field for airplane manufacturers, you created an unlevel playing field for the airlines that are competing against those forces?
Well, first of all, it's just not true. I'll tell you why. We're the only export credit agency in the world that has something called economic impact. It goes back to the 1968, and it's been adjusted over time. What economic impact does, in a nutshell, is we look at what were the benefits to the U.S. economy as a whole and what might be any potential harm to the economy, because we're in a business to help the economy and help jobs, not hurt jobs. So we do that on every transaction we look at it, particularly if it's capital goods, because that's really where you have the classic example, if you're going to build a steel mill, we would sell the equipment, but could the output ultimately be damaging to the U.S. economy? So we do that on every transaction, including an airline seat, which is an unusual characterization of that as a capital equipment, but we do that even for the service, because an airline seat is really a service you're providing. We do that in every single transaction. And when warranted, we've done a more in-depth one. But we've been very public. It's on the website about what the methodology is. Yes, Delta made a claim about 7,500 jobs. They've never substantiated where that came from. And in fact, when they stopped flying to India, they cited other reasons. They never cited that. The reasons they cited at the time was, we're going to service it through Atlanta and Amsterdam. They cited a host of reasons, restructuring, moving more of their bases around and so forth. They never had any, this is all years after the fact they decided this was the reason, many years after the fact. But more importantly, even if you took their 7,500 jobs at face value, even if you took them, they've never substantiated. In aerospace alone, we supported more than 50,000 jobs last year. More than 50,000 jobs in aerospace. And we've made sure that the balance is that we're supporting more than we're hurting. And lastly, someone's going to buy an airplane and fly to America. And we have a choice. They're going to fly in an Airbus plane or a Boeing plane. That's the simple fact. Whether we like that or not, just because they don't buy a Boeing plane and just because we're not financing it doesn't mean they're going to say, oh, you're right, I don't think I should fly to America. The competition's there. They're talking about protection. The competition's there regardless.
Just so I'm clear, when you do that economic analysis, is that you're looking at it on a net basis, the net benefits?
Yes, we're looking at the net benefits, precisely. And that was, again, this has been established by Congress. It's in our charter. We updated it most recently from the last reform. We were asked to review it. When we reviewed it, we said, well, now that we've actually found some better ways of doing it, let's improve it. So we've reviewed it, we've improved it, it's transparent, it's been in our charter. And again, we're the only export credit agency in the entire world that does this, because the example I gave you is they're going to fly to America anyway. Delta will face that competition regardless. So sometimes, frankly, it appears we like to lose twice. Let's like not sell them the plane, but then we're still going to have the competition. But we want to make sure that we get the balance right.
Continuing our first round, Mark Trumbull from the Monitor.
Thanks. I want to ask about, you mentioned the role of China, and sort of if we're not leading, they might take the lead. I think there's a lot of concern just broadly about that, not just with Exim. But I wonder, just reading this statistic that now 34% of financing is following OECD standards, right, where 16 years ago it was 100%. Is that, in your view, a sign that China and its model of doing things is gaining ground and the U.S. is effectively declining as a leader in the world?
Well, what we're trying to do is get more of the world to do it on a more rules-based and transparent way, and that's frankly been a challenge. President Obama met with then Vice President Xi, now President Xi, in 2012 when he was here and said, we need to find a new framework to work with. And so there's something called the International Working Group that's actually been working on saying, okay, how do we find a common ground that we can move forward on this? So we're trying to get more of the world to be more rules-based, which is what this report was designed to do, is to see, again, it's 45 years old, how we do that. But that's a challenge. I mean, frankly, even those that are rules-based, sometimes they find ways to operate outside of the rules. The rules cover export finance. There's a lot of it's called untied financing. It's not directly tied to an export, but it certainly is. It's sort of a soft power, Again, and it's hard to get precise, but I will say, the United States, we split an order with China for locomotives in South Africa. Originally the tender was not going to be split. It got split. And I was informed that a month or so before the tender was actually awarded, the Chinese made a $5 billion loan for track overhaul signaling for the rail authority in South Africa. Did that have anything to do with the fact that they got half the order? I don't know, but I certainly have a hunch. $5 billion, a lot of money.
Jackie Combs from the New York Times.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted you to address something that some small business, several small business people I talked to described meetings with their representatives who are opposed to this, conservative Republicans, and they said that each of them said that the person said to them, it isn't about you, Mr. X, it's about Boeing, and I would support a way to just make Ex-Im Bank do financing for small businesses only. Is that practical? Can that even be done?
No, it's not practical, I would say for two reasons. One, let's remember that a company like Boeing it's an assembly firm. It's a brilliant engineering firm, systems integrated, that assembles products. You know, Ford Motor Company, they don't manufacture cars, they assemble them. Boeing assembles airplanes, and there are 15,000 companies in the supply chain. The estimate's about 6,000 of them are small businesses, so you will hurt a lot of small businesses if we're not supporting also the larger companies that are exporting. And additionally, I'm very proud of the 90% of our client base that's small business, but larger companies also create a lot of jobs and support them. We just approved the transaction yesterday morning, a company called Zico in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and I went out to visit them a few months ago. They started with us. They were a small business. They had less than 500 employees. They now have 800 employees, and they estimate they may add 200 more employees. So they will no longer be a small business. Do we then stop supporting them? Does that really help support job growth? I don't see how that works.
Have they talked to you about have the conservative Republicans who are opposed to this, or
I mean, I've heard it from people like you. I've heard it from people in the media, but I haven't heard it.
You haven't been presented with, here's where we want to draw the line. Businesses below this line can get financing. Businesses above this line cannot.
Well, why we'd want to unilaterally disarm? That's not going to happen. Germany, France, and Britain are not agreeing to that. So why we'd want to do that and give Airbus a bigger berth to build market share and put more jobs in Hamburg, more jobs in Toulouse, and more jobs in their supply chain, I don't understand.
We've got about 4 minutes left. Anybody who hasn't had a first round? If not, Mr. Carney, we'll go to the second.
All right, thank you. A lot of what you say is based on the premise that the financing wouldn't be there in these deals if Ex-Im went away. At your conference, I met a lot of people who work in the finance and told me contrary. Michael Kramer at AIG said Ex-Im Bank is a competitor with them. Brian Maloney at DS Factoring said there's definitely competition between us and Ex-Im. It's outlandish to say there isn't. Charles Baker at Actrofin, which gets Ex-Im backing, says there's a vibrant private export credit market. Ex-Im provides financing, the private sector also provides. So is there a empirical basis? What is the basis of the claim that Ex-Im doesn't compete with private sector financing, or that this financing wouldn't exist if Ex-Im went away?
Well, first of all, on the application, you have to state why you need our financing. And if you falsify that, you're committing perjury and you're breaking the law.
Could that ever be proven that somebody falsified it? I mean, it seems an unprovable statement.
Well, I ran a company. You, as a corporate officer, you're not going to start knowingly perjuring yourself and putting your company in jeopardy. You fill out if you're making a campaign contribution, you say, I work for Ford Motor Company. Do we require every candidate to call? I want a letter from Ford verifying your employment status, your W-2 to prove to me. No, you say you really want to perjure yourself. So I think we have a rule of law here that does have some degree of trust. And if someone says, no, I can't get financing, now in some cases, of course, we verify because depending on the transaction we're working with that bank, because frequently who brings us in? The people who bring us in are insurance brokers. The people who bring us in are the commercial banks who say, I can't do this deal unless I get a guarantee. Someone goes to an insurance broker and says, I need insurance for this. And they will bid it out and say, okay, just like if you need home insurance, they'll bid it out to 3 or 4 companies. They'll bid out the insurance to a number of companies. I talked to a few companies, and thankfully they said, well, on day one I couldn't get insurance. But actually, now that I've got 8 or 9 years of track record with XM, and I can prove to an insurance company I'm a good risk, now I have the option. Now I can actually go elsewhere, and I hope they do. I hope they do go elsewhere, because that's what we're here for. If we can be the training wheels and then let people go off, that's a good thing. So, we're also in a period, Tim, during the financial crisis, none of these companies could operate. Now the markets are recovering. One thing that does happen is, they go to our list. All of our customers are online, and they try and take those customers, which is a good thing. But again, I use the fire truck example. There's not a fire raging right now, so I got it. Let's sell the fire truck, close all the fire stations. We'll never need that again, because we had that once in a million year. Oh no, actually we had the depression, and now we just had a recession. So they're not that infrequent. So we exist to fill in a gap when there's a gap. When there's not a gap, that's why our lending volume this year, last year was $20.5 billion. 2 years ago was $36.5 billion. We're almost doing half of what we did 2 years ago. And last I would just add to that is I ran a small business for 20 years, a family business. As David mentioned, I've never known a small business that does not have trouble getting financing, particularly when it's talking about overseas sales.
And on that note, we're out of time, so thank you very much for doing this. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes.
You're on a good show.